Oh no, I don't want a recording. So I need to share this screen. I hope I've got the right screen here. Bear with me a second. There may be a 1 second blackout. Are we there yet, Vanessa? Can we see it? Yeah. Okay. So how does my satnav work? Well, my screen's a little bit obscured here. I'm not sure I can see what I want to, but oh yeah, there we are. So come on, let's get this up. Have some fun. That's the #1 activity. I think we're going to do that in a moment. You're going to understand what an algorithm is. Well, it's probably harder to spell than it is to understand. So we'll get to that in a moment and you'll have learned something new. We're going to use Dijkstra's algorithm. Well, Dijkstra's algorithm is a very modern piece of maths. Dijkstra only died a few years ago. So unlike a lot of the maths you've done, this is fairly recent stuff. Dijkstra was a Dutchman, by the way. That's why he has that name. And we're going to talk about something called logistics, which I'll mention as we go along. So here comes the mind reading bit and your first exercise. I want you all to think of a number. Now, whilst you're doing that, I'm going to try and read your minds. Oh, you're all thinking of different numbers. We'll have to do a little bit more work on this. Can you double that number you've just thought of, please? Get your teacher to lead this if you're all disagreeing about what number you've thought of. So you've thought of a number and doubled it. Okay, can you now add 10 to that number, please? Right, this step's a little bit longer. Can you now halve that value that you've last thought of? And here's the last step. If you can remember it, can you take away the number you first thought of? Okay, here we go. Well, most of you have got this right. And you're thinking of 5. Can you put your thumbs up to Vanessa if some of you got that right, or I got that right? Anybody get it, Vanessa?
Can't see any thumbs up. If the teachers can use the thumbs up emoji reaction on Zoom, that would be great, or even just pop it in the chat. Yep, we've got a load of thumbs up. Yeah.
Oh, good, good. Okay, well, how did that work? Well, I could explain it for a 10-year-old. If we have a few minutes at the end, I'll show you, I'll guarantee a 10-year-old would understand it. For teachers, if you haven't seen it before, you probably have, it's an old one, then just ask yourself, what would happen if I didn't ask you to add 10? What if I said, think of a number, I'll say 7, and I doubled it to 14, and I missed this step out. And then I halve 14, oh, I'd be back to 7. And if I took away the number I first thought of, I'd be back to 0. So it seems to be this step which causes my result to come out. And basically, whatever number you add here, I told you to add 10, the result is going to be half of that number. So if I told you to add 4, I could have said, ooh, the answer's 2. And when I've shown this to children in the past, some of them have gone home and tried it out on mum or dad or grandma or friends and neighbours and said, if I can tell what number you're thinking of, will you give me a small reward? Money, chocolate, whatever they could get. And it usually works. So we'll come back to that at the end if you need any further discussion on it. So at that point, I think we need to revert back to me. So hopefully I'll come back on your screen in a moment. Am I there, Vanessa? Yeah, okay. So most of the maths you do at school, it's very much like the maths I did at school. At least it is at primary school. And it's been around a long time. Somebody first coined the term mathematics about 2,500 years ago. It's attributed to an old Greek guy called Pythagoras. But maths has changed a bit, particularly at high school since then. Now, as I say, the primary school you're probably doing the same as me, and you don't use calculators very much. But when you go to high school, you will use calculators. Now, when I was at primary school, we didn't have calculators. We had to use things like this. This is called the slide rule. I used to call it a guessing stick. And what you had to do was to slide this along here to see how to work out some various difficult calculations. It was horrible. No wonder it was called a guessing stick. Nowadays, you have calculators. And because of that, because we can do a lot of maths much more quickly, the nature of the maths we do is a little bit different as well. Now, you'll probably use calculators or even computers at high school. You might use something like this, BBC Microbit. Anybody have seen one of those before? You can write little programs on those. Ideal Christmas gift. They don't cost a fortune. We have them in the primary school I go in and support. And maths can sometimes produce some very surprising results. So, for instance, if I was lucky enough to win the lottery and somebody said, "Congratulations, Nigel, you've won £1 million," I'd say, great. And then if they said, "Or we could give you a trickle of money for a month. We'll give you a penny on the first day and double it on the second day and quadruple it on the third day," and so on. And I'd think, well, it would take me about a week to earn £1 on that basis. I'd say, no. But actually, if they did that for a month, by the end of the month, I'd have a lot more than £1 million. It's astonishing that if we didn't do the maths, we wouldn't know. And when the Americans sent the first astronauts into space, it was actually some women mathematicians who made sure that they got there safely. And John Glenn, the first astronaut, said he wouldn't go unless the women checked the calculations, which they did. And there's a film about it. It's called Hidden Figures. It's a great film. So the work you're doing at primary school, two most important things you learn at school, and I have to confess the most important one isn't maths, it's reading. If you can't read, you really can't access a great deal of fun, comics or work or signposts of things, but maths is a close second. And curiously, people seem to be very reluctant to say they can't read, or they're very brave if they say they can't read well. There's plenty of people who say, "Oh, I couldn't do maths, I can't do maths," as if I just wasn't tall enough, or something like that. Well, there's no reason why you can't. Some people call me a mathematician, some people call me various other things, but I was in fact an engineer originally because I liked science. So we'll have a look at some more slides and we'll see, what was I thinking when I was your age? You must all be close to your 10th birthday, I would have thought. Some of you might have had it by now. So let's have a look and see what life was like when I was 10. Hopefully you've got this screen up now. So here's young Nigel. That's what I looked like when I was 10. And I quite like maths. Well, it was mostly numbers then. I think I liked it because I got reasonable marks. I wasn't the best in the class by any means, but I was worse at other subjects. But I really liked science. Boy, did I like science. Was it fun or hard work? Well, a bit of both, really, I thought. I could get quite upset if I got things wrong. And the other thing that briefly crossed my mind when I was 10, and it was briefly, was what would I do when I left school many years from then? What would I do for a job or a career? Well, the only thoughts I really had were, I'd like to do something enjoyable. I don't want a horrible job. And ideally, I'd like to make a bit of money. I don't have to be filthy rich, but I'd like to have enough to have a comfortable life. And at that point, all I could do was see jobs I didn't want. I didn't want to be a policeman. I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't think I knew enough or that I could control a class. So I thought maybe a train driver, was pretty keen on that as an idea. But I hadn't dreamed of the number of jobs that were available. So this is where I finished up working, because I went on to be an electronic engineer. I studied electronics because I got an electronic engineer kit when I was a youngster. And nothing worked at first, but eventually after playing with it for a while, various things did work. And I thought, oh, I'd like to do some electronics. So I went off and studied electronics and I went to work here. Now, I don't know if any of you know where this is. I think most of our viewers today are from the east of England. So you might recognize it as BT Labs at Dijkstra Park, just east of Ipswich. And I used to work in this building here. We called it the main lab block. And on the site, about 4,000 people worked, mainly engineers and scientists. And I'll tell you what, they were all good at maths. They'd all studied maths for a while. Now, there were some great people there. And the engineers, gosh, that's a much misunderstood term. They don't go around with spanners and screwdrivers. Most of their work is with maths and science. And I'm afraid anybody can call themselves an engineer. You can if you want to. You can't call yourself a doctor, but you can call yourself an engineer. So it's a hugely misunderstood term. Professional engineers mainly rely on science and maths. So what was BT's problem? Well, this was the problem I worked on before I left BT. We wanted a work manager application. Now, BT has lots of jobs to complete every day. They might want to install broadband. It could have been that there's been a flood in a town and all the underground ducts are flooded, or there might have been a storm or a lightning flash or something, or people might want phones installing. And they have thousands of engineers who have to go and do those jobs. And at the time I started work on this, it was a man in an office, and he listened to the engineers phoning in. He got lots of paperwork on his desk, and he tried his best and did a pretty good job for one man to allocate the jobs to engineers. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, because you have to remember where people are as well as can they do the job. And this whole idea of assigning jobs to people and ideally using minimum travel time is what logistics is. I'd never heard of logistics when I left school, but it's basically the organization of moving goods or people. And it's a huge job, and there's lots of them. So when you move trains or aircraft, that's all logistics. And what happens if an airport closes due to a storm? Well, all the aircraft are in the wrong place. And imagine trying to get them back to the right place. Well, I don't think I can, but happily, we've got people who do that, and they do it using maths and algorithms. So have a look at this. Here's a little map I've drawn. Don't take any notice of the length of the lines. We just want to look at the numbers. And what I want you to do, as quickly as you can, but it took my son more than a minute to do this, and he's a seriously techie adult. I want to know the shortest distance from Bristol, which is a city down here in the west of England, to St Albans, which is a city just north of London. Now, I've marked the motorways in double strip yellows, but as I say, what you really need to look at is the lengths of the lines. So take a moment, perhaps you can signal thumbs up or something to Vanessa when you're done, and see if you can agree what's the shortest route from Bristol to St Albans. Now, those motorways look very tempting, but I'm not sure the motorway is the best route. Any feedback yet, Vanessa?
Not just yet.
Not
I think
yet.
we need a few more minutes just
That's
to have
all right. Yeah, take your time. Team effort.
There are a few feedbacks in chat.
Okay.
They're all coming up with similar answers. They've all said 175.
Okay, well, I'll have to look at it again myself. I should have done this earlier, shouldn't I? If I remember this rightly, I think you had to use this leg. So it was 60 and 45 would be 105. And then the last leg is 175. Yes, I remember it now. Well done to people who got that. You were quicker than my son, and he's a postgraduate physics engineer who works in laser technology. So you probably outgunned him. Yeah, so the route is Bristol to Swindon to Oxford to St Albans. And we can see how long it took to work that out for just a simple little map like this. So if I wanted the shortest time to travel rather than distance, it might be I want to think about how fast you could go down a motorway, and that might be a different answer. And if there were roadworks that popped up somewhere, I may need to modify the answer. So here's your big moment. This is the second exercise we're going to do together in a moment, and I'm going to tell you something very surprising at the end of it. I just wanted to pop this in. This is a slide of a town. This particular one is Ipswich, the county town of Suffolk. And you can see if I wanted to travel from the university here, which is down by the docks, to the football ground, there's a lot of roads in the way, a lot more roads than we looked at a moment ago. So if we're going to have a system that automatically finds the best route, it had better be clever and it had better be quick, or else we're never going to manage it. So your satnav system uses something called Dijkstra's algorithm. And it's harder to spell than it is to use. Dijkstra's algorithm says, visit the nearest place you've never been to and inspect the route. And in a moment, we're going to find our way from point A. I've just called it A, but it could have a name. It could be any port. And we could do this for all the others. Point B, I could call this Beano Town from one of my favorite comics. And we're going to eventually find our way to H for home. I'll let you name the other ones by yourself. So Dijkstra's algorithm says, go to the nearest place you've never visited. And I've marked those in red. So we have to choose one of the red dots. Until you reach your destination. Oh, good. That sounds straightforward enough. Oh, by the shortest possible route. So what do you think? Should I go to D, which will take me 4, or should I go to B, which will take me 3? I think I can answer this one. I'm going to go to B. And when I get there, I'll turn this yellow and have a look what new roads I can see from location B. So Dijkstra's algorithm says, go and have a look from B. Well, when I get to B, I can see some new roads that I couldn't previously see. There's one here called C. And if I go 3 kilometers to here and another 3 to here, I reckon I can get to C in 6. 3 and 4 says E, I can make it there in 7. How long would it take me to get to F? Can somebody, I'll take the first answer offered if it's right. Can somebody suggest how long it would take me to reach point F?
Yep, 10 is the...
10.
Yep.
Thank you. So 10 is right. Well done to first answer, whoever you were. So I need to choose one of these red dots now, and I want the nearest point, the nearest red point that I haven't visited before. Now, when I've done this with people before, not everybody gets this right. Can somebody suggest which node I ought to visit next?
D6.
7,
C6. 6.
Yeah. 6, so it's tempting, isn't it? Is there anything less than 6 I could get to? Remember, there's 4 red dots.
D4.
Yes, D4. I need to go back there. Didn't think that was a good idea at first, but now it does look like a good idea. So we're all back to D. We'll visit here, have a look and see what we can see from D. C6 was a near second guess. Oh, well, this looks interesting. I can see now there's a road that goes from D up to C. So actually, I know how to get to C in 5 now. That was 6 a moment ago. And I can see the other legs are in. We've got numbers to get us here. What about G? How long would it take me to get to G? Any offers?
They're all saying 10.
Terrific. Well done, everybody. It is 10. So I think in that case, I'll help you out with this one. If that's 10 and that's 10 and that's 7, but this is now only 5, I'm going to visit point C and see what I can see from there. Oh, okay. Well, not a great deal more, but F was 10 a moment ago, and now it's only 8. So I'll take some help with this. Which of the unvisited red nodes should I go and have a look from next?
E7.
E7 is correct.
That's what they're saying in chat.
Okay, so I'll go to E7 and see what I can see. Aha, I can get home in time. Oh, that's great. So, good to know. But I wonder if it's the fastest route. Looks like I get home in 15. I ought to have a look from the nearest unvisited place that I haven't been to yet. I wonder if I can beat 15. I can definitely get here in 8. So here goes. Oh, right, a couple of roads gone in. Well, if I could get there in 8, I'm guessing I could get all the way home in 12. So I can get home in 12. I'm very pleased about that. I suppose I ought to check whether I've missed a trick and there was a really fast link here. Let's just have a look. No, there wasn't a faster link from there. So 12 was the answer. And this is the route we've picked out as we've gone along here. So that was Dijkstra's algorithm. And of course, it runs very quickly on a computer. And that's what your satnav is doing when it tries to find a route. So let me pop out of here and I'll probably finish with the slides now. I'll just talk to you from the screen I've got here for a moment.
We had one question pop up in chat, Nigel, and it was just with regards to how the satellites come into it.
Oh, yes. What was the question, Vanessa? Can you remember?
How do satnavs use satellites?
Oh, right. Well, the satellite transmits its position. The satellite knows where it is, and all the satellites can see each other, so they know exactly where they are. And they transmit the time. They all keep exactly the same time. Now, because they're all different distances away from you, when we see the time they've reported, there's a delay. If, for instance, say we had 3 clocks here, and I said, I'll hold on to this clock, you go and take that one and put it on the moon, and I'll look at it from there. And assuming you don't get burnt up, I'll get somebody else to take one to the sun, and we'll put one on the sun and hope I can still read it and it doesn't get burnt out. Well, when I looked at mine, it will be telling the right time. When I look at the one on the moon, it'll be about 1 second slow, or it will appear to be 1 second slow to me, because it takes so long for the light to travel from the moon. And when I look at the one from the sun, gosh, that is a long way away, that will appear to be running about 8 minutes slow. So when I see a clock that's 8 minutes slow, I can say that's 93 million miles away. And when I see the one on the moon that's 1 second slow, I can say that's about 300 million meters away. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they're about right. So I can say, well, if that's in that direction and it's so far away, and that's in that direction, it's so far away, then where those lines converge, I must be here. And you can imagine the same thing in a room. If I said I'm 1 meter away from the edge of this piano, I could tie a piece of string there 1 meter long and move it around and say, I'm definitely somewhere on the end of this piece of string. And if I had on the other edge of the piano out from the room, somebody that says, no, you're this distance from here, I'd say, well, hang on, I've got to be on the end of this one and I've got to join you. I must converge in that position exactly. So we'll pick it up at the end again if that explanation isn't clear enough for you. So what happened next? Well, the Work Manager application was a big success for the company. Not everybody liked it, and I could understand why, because some of the people who were engineers, when they talked to the guy on the desk, he would say things like, I'll give you a job over in this town because then you'll be going past your home and you can walk your dog at lunchtime. And that was nice to be able to do that. but it wasn't always the most efficient way of doing it. So not entirely popular with the people who had to use it, but it saved BT millions of pounds every year. So there's big money to be made by making these systems. And consequently, if you're the people who can do it, companies are reasonably willing to pay you generously as well. The group that had made this satellite navigation system, BT, said, well, it's not our core business, routing people around. We're going to separate you into a different company. And so they did. All the people who worked on this moved out of BT and operated in a different company, which is still running in Ipswich in Suffolk. I thought at this point, well, if I've got to leave BT, I'm not sure I'm going to go with this. I think I might try and do something completely different. So having thought so carefully at the age of 10 about what jobs I would do and knowing with certainty the ones I absolutely would not do, I became a teacher. And I contacted schools and said, I'd like to be a teacher. I think I might be able to teach computing or business or maths. And all the schools came back saying, maths, come and teach some maths. And so I got a job in maths, and I taught maths for a while in a school. And maths has always kept me employed, and always kept me reasonably well paid. I'm not very rich, but I live comfortably, and I've got a car, and it's not a new one, but I've never really wanted for anything because of that. Some of the people I've taught in the school or went through the school, they've become rich, they've gone for other things. Not everybody has. One of them became very famous as well, but I didn't want riches or fame. I wanted a job I enjoyed, and I wanted a reasonable amount of reward for it. So I did the unimaginable thing of becoming a teacher, and now I still do maths. Even though I've retired and I don't have to go to work anymore, I now help out with STEM ambassadors. I volunteer in a primary school every Monday. We do a bit of maths and a bit of computing. We have a little code club. And I still get people who contact me and say, oh, did you used to be a maths teacher? Can you help me with some maths, please? In fact, I had a girl last night I'd never met before. She came along. She's a top grade student. She's looking for a grade A at A level. And she said, you know, sometimes I get a bit stuck and I'd like some help. So when you leave primary school at the end of this year, you'll go on to secondary school and you'll do maths for another 5 years until you're in year 11, and you'll take something called the GCSE exam, and you'll know a lot more maths by then. And if you really like maths and you're good at it, you might choose to spend a further 2 years going on to maths A level, advanced level, which you do when you're 17 or 18. And if you're really, really, really good at maths and keen on it, then there's even an A level in further maths, which very often is just more maths rather than really hard maths. Now, very few people do further maths. If you're going to be an engineer, a professional engineer, it's a great subject to have. And when I was at school and we'd have people in saying, I don't know what subjects to do, what should I do, thinking of doing this, very often I'd say, have you thought about further maths? And they'd say, no. I'd say, do you know what it is? They'd say, no, not really. Well, the Dijkstra's algorithm problem you've just done was a question in the discrete maths paper of A-level further maths about 5 years ago. So you've actually done a question that was on the A-level further maths paper. So how clever are you? Very clever. And before I finish, it just struck me that maths seems to come up everywhere. You don't have to do any maths to be a musician, but I've got the piano behind me. Why is it these notes sound horrible, and yet these notes sound sweet? And it's because all those notes are related mathematically. One of them is twice as high as the other, or 3 times as high as the other, 4 times or 5 times as high as the other. That's why they sound lovely. And if they're only 1 1/3 times higher than each other, they sound horrible. So the last thing I've got to show you is something from what was probably the most moving part of my teaching career. And it was last year, long after I'd left teaching, I got an email from a girl who said, we'd had a lesson in the summer. The class as usual had come in and said, oh, we're doing something fun. And I'd said, all my lessons are fun. But on this occasion, I'd said, oh, we'll do the Fibonacci sequence. That's another thing that's harder to spell than it is to do. And I said, it's a number sequence and it comes up in nature all the time. Number of leaves on a number of petals on a flower, shape of a nautilus shell on a beach, the shape of a storm, the branches on a trees, even the spirals on a pine cone. I'd never even noticed pine cones have spirals. I've popped some elastic bands in so you can see them. But can you see the pattern has spirals in it? And the spirals run in both directions. And it's explained by this really simple sequence, Fibonacci sequence. You don't need to be at high school to do it. It's really quite simple. And the girl said she wasn't a lover of maths, but she'd listened to that lesson. And now 10 years later, she was at art school and she'd chosen to do her project on Fibonacci sequence. So the mission was to make this enjoyable and to have you learn something new. So I hope you've been inspired. If you want to write your own algorithms, just go to Code Club or use Scratch or get yourself one of these. There's even a little project most code clubs do called the Astro Pi Challenge, where you can write a little bit of code and it will run on the International Space Station. And I would say it's not rocket science, but it is. Okay, so hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much. So we'll open up the floor. If anyone has any questions at all for Nigel before you head off, please pop them in chat. We've got a lot of thank yous coming through on the chat for you. Thank you for the best session. Lots of thank yous. I don't think there's any questions actually.
Okay, well, that means I must have covered it all.
Yeah, I think it was very clear. No, there is no questions at all coming through by the looks of it, just a lot of thank you. So thank you ever so much for joining us today as well. The video will be available to download on YouTube. Oh, I think we've just had a question pop. How does a satellite know if there's traffic? Oh, good question. Yeah, good question. The satellite doesn't know. So if I wanted to use my phone, saying I've got a Facebook message now, if I just use my phone, I don't actually need to connect to the phone network. This will just pick up the satellite anyway. But if there's track hold up, I need my phone to get a report from somewhere. So you'll see in various places around the road network, there are very often cameras on blue poles. They're just monitoring traffic congestion. So the traffic congestion is reported to computers on the ground. And if your phone is connected to that computer, then it can tell you there's congestion here. We can work out the other routes. But yeah, the satellites alone wouldn't be able to do that. Good question. I haven't thought of mentioning it. Are there satellites all around the Earth? Oh, yeah. And how? When I was born, there weren't any satellites other than the moon. The first one went up in the late 1950s. It was called Sputnik. They called it the flying grapefruit because it was about the size of a football. And the Americans popped them up soon afterwards. So the beginning of the 60s, there were only a couple. The GPS system that's used for our satnavs, the Americans put that up. There's about 30 of those. Some of them are spares in case things go faulty. And they're popping new ones up all the time because they do have a certain lifespan. When they originally went up, they could spot your location, or your GPS watch could tell you your location to within about 5 meters. The ones that are going up now, there's a few up, but not a full network. They're going to be able to tell you to within 30 centimeters of where you're standing. That's about the length of a 12-inch ruler, or maybe you call them 30 centimeter rulers.
I think it'll be about another 3 years before they're fully up. So there's 30 in the GPS system. The Americans have got theirs. As they can turn it off, other nations have their own. So the Russians have a set, the Chinese have a set. The Europeans have put a set up called the Galileo System. Elon Musk is thinking of putting up thousands of satellites. There's a report in the paper today for internet coverage. He thinks if you can throw satellites up, we can all use those for internet connections. And that will be a real game changer if that happens. I did think somebody might say to me, the question I would have pondered is, if all the satellites are moving about, why does my Sky TV dish always point in the same direction? And the answer is, if the Sky satellite is whizzing around the Earth, and it is, they fixed it so it goes around once a day. And as the Earth also rotates once a day, then the Sky TV satellite appears to be stationary. So you can just leave your dish bolted to the side of your house. It does mean the Sky satellite has to rotate around the equator. It can't go up here and do this. It has to be around the Earth. And consequently, it means if you're ever lost and you haven't got a compass, the Sky TV satellite is pretty much due south. Well, it's actually about 27 degrees east of south. But when I look at mine or other houses, I say, that must be south down there if I ever get lost. Was there another question?
More, yeah, there are a couple more questions, actually.
Right.
So we've got, how does the satellite link to your phone? Somebody else wants to know how many satellites are needed to actually pinpoint your exact location. And the third question is, what is the furthest satellite from the Earth?
Okay. Well, the phone has a GPS receiver in it, a microwave receiver, exactly the same as the one in this watch. So you can buy these gadgets and they have very, very high frequency receivers in them. It's just a radio receiver in there and a little computer that says, gosh, if all these satellites are in these positions and they think this is the time, then I know where I am. The furthest how many satellites do you need? You need a minimum of 4 to be visible. And as there's about 30 up there scattered around the Earth, or Planet Orange in my case, then there's always at least 4 that are visible. They're about, sorry to be in old units, they're about 12,000 miles up. They orbit twice a day. And if you don't know what 12,000 miles is, it's the distance from here to Australia. And they're that far straight up in the air. The furthest satellite, well, to tell you the truth, I'm not absolutely sure. The furthest one I know of is the Sky TV satellite, or other satellites that need to stay in the same position. That's about 22,000 miles out, so that it goes around once a day. And I can't think of a reason why anybody would want to be slower than once a day. So I imagine that's the furthest out. Telecoms companies have these up as well. There's one up in the air somewhere mid-Atlantic, so that people in the UK or Europe who want to talk to America, they can always see this satellite, and so can the Americans. And there's one over somewhere towards India, so that people in England can see it and people in India can see it. And actually, that one, they can only just see it. So most of BT satellites are over in Cornwall in the west of England, because that's a pretty great place for looking over the Atlantic. But the one for the Far East, you can't see it from Cornwall. So there's actually an Earth station at Martlesham Heath. And if you go around the back of the BT lab site at Martlesham Heath, there is a footpath there. There are some massive dishes. They look like they're pointing straight across the field, but they're pointing low over the horizon so they can see this distant satellite.
So just before we go, there's just 2 more really quick questions. What are satellites made of, and do they run on batteries?
Okay, well, I believe they do have batteries, but they have huge solar panels, because we'd like them to be up there for a long time. They're quite expensive to send up into space, so we don't want to have to send them regularly. So solar panels really provide most of the power, but we need a battery because they do go around the back of the Earth and sometimes they can't see the sun. And what are they made of? Well, I can't name the exact materials, but they'll be metal, and they're really housing a lot of electronic equipment. So they need to house something that will be able to transmit their signal out. So if you take the Sky TV, it's called the Dijkstra satellite, then there's a little transmitter in there and a receiver as well, because people on planet Earth are making the programs and they need to send them up to the satellite so the satellite can then broadcast them down to other places. So it's a flying box with some electronics in it, a battery, and solar panels really to keep the show going.
There is a couple more questions.
Oh, great to hear.
Miss Radcliffe's class has asked whether it's possible to see the satellites. Can we see them from Earth? And Miss Fisher's class would like to know whether it's possible for them to fall. Can they fall back to Earth?
Okay, good questions. You can see some of the satellites. You can't see the Sky TV one, it's too far away. I told you the GPS ones are about 12,000 miles. I don't know if you can see those, but the weather satellites, they're only about 150 miles up. You can see those. They go around about every 90 minutes. And the satellite you can definitely see is the International Space Station. Now, the International Space Station also goes around, I think it's about every 90 minutes. The trouble is the International Space Station goes around this way, and planet Earth keeps turning this way as it does so. So sometimes you can see it pass just for a few minutes, and then the Earth turns and you might not see it again for another 24 hours or whatever. So if you look on the internet, you'll find you can get views of the International Space Station. It's got a camera on it and you can have a look and see what it can see right now down on planet Earth. And yes, they can fall back to Earth. People say there's no gravity on the International Space Station. Between you and me, that's not strictly true. If the International Space Station managed to stop in its orbit and stop going round, it would fall straight back down to Earth because there's about 80% of gravity on the International Space Station. So it has to keep whizzing round. It would come down in a big hurry. And if the satellites go too fast, they'll whirl out of Earth's orbit and disappear. And if the satellites go too slow, they'll come back down to Earth. Well, eventually, most of them do decay and come back down to Earth. But I don't think most of them are much of a hazard. They generally get burnt up into dust before they hit the ground. The International Space Station would make more of an impact. So
there isn't a chance of it raining satellites one day?
No, I don't think we'd be raining satellites, but we've had the odd big one that's come down and we know it's coming and there's usually a warning goes out.
I think you've actually answered the other questions. So do they use the Earth's mass to orbit or do they have their own rockets?
Once they've been pushed up there, they're largely just going around on their own. They might have some minor controls on them or a limited amount of, I'll say, gas power or jet power, just to correct their orbit occasionally. But they won't be able to keep doing that because they'll just run out of fuel. They don't carry much spare correction fluid with them.
I think the very, very final question now before we say goodbye is from Miss Fisher's class. Can a satellite go so far from the Earth that it actually orbits the moon?
Well, that could happen. I don't think anybody's ever tried it other than when people have done moon landings. And if you think about that, when people have gone to the moon, it started in the late 60s and been a few missions since then, they went to the moon and they started orbiting the moon. So that was a satellite round the moon, and they sent the moon lander down and the mothership still kept orbiting round. And then the moon lander came back up, rejoined the mothership, and then they fired the boosters and went a bit quicker and hurled out of orbit. and headed back to Earth. So yeah, what a great question. I should just mention, in case everybody disappears, when I talked about Code Club and the Astro Pi Challenge, for people who do that, the code will be run on the International Space Station, and they'll send you a certificate saying your code ran, and they'll tell you where the International Space Station was in its orbit when your code ran for 30 seconds. And I have done this with year 5s and 6s at the primary school I go into. The challenge is open again now. I think it's open until something like March. So you've plenty of time to Google Astro Pi Challenge and see if you can sort it out.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Nigel. It's been really great listening to your talk today. Hopefully everybody enjoyed that. I will be sending a feedback form round to all of the schools afterwards. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for joining us. Goodbye.
Okay. Right, thank you. It was fun.